Hi, I'm Mike Weaver, one of the product owners here at Quadratech. In this video, we're going to talk about how to do an Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration. In this video, we're going to define the problem and why we have to do tenant-to-tenant migrations. We're going to review all the different workloads in Office 365 and how they can be migrated. We're going to talk about challenges with endpoints like mobile devices and user workstations and how they need to be reconfigured in the project. We're going to talk about the gotchas in some of the projects and share some of our experience. The other aspect we'll talk about is if we should do a big bang cutover or a stage migration and what kind of companies choose which option. Let's go ahead and hop into the series. Let's talk about the challenges of a Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration. And I think what's helpful is let's go back a few years and talk about the adoption of Office 365. Back when we first started adopting cloud technology, a lot of us had a lot of concerns over our tenant being in a shared service. To put it in simple terms, we really want to ensure that the Coke recipe never ended up in the Pepsi tenant. As time has gone on, we have accepted that these controls are in place. However, these same controls that keep tenants separate really cause challenges when we have a merger, acquisition, or divestiture, and we need to combine tenants together. As a result, the migration options can be very limiting. Microsoft provides a couple very basic migration options, and these programs, as of recording, are still in preview. As a result, we've been able to create really robust solutions for the most common workloads for tenant-to-tenant migrations. However, it's not a complete package, and there are challenges in the space. In the gotchas section, we're going to talk about where people can get hung up and some of the challenges that are there. For those that have done a lot of merger, acquisition, and divestiture work doing on-prem migrations, there are some concepts that are the same, but there still is a lot of differences between an on-prem migration and a tenant-to-tenant migration. Let's hop into the workloads and review the challenges of the most common workloads. Let's talk about Microsoft Exchange. Microsoft Exchange is the most common workload in Office 365 and is really the most mature workload that you run into. Many of us have administered on-prem Exchange systems for years and may have even done a merger, acquisition, or divestiture project with Microsoft Exchange. When we talk about Exchange from a tenant-to-tenant migration, we tend to see very, very large volumes. When we're doing on-prem migrations, we gave users very small mailbox quotas. And that allowed us to speed up the migration because there wasn't as much data. With even some of the most basic licenses, including a 25 gig or 50 gig mailbox, users don't do cleanup anymore. And as a result, the mailbox size keeps getting larger and larger and larger. When we add in other challenges like the SMTP domain only being able to be in one tenant at the same time, this can create some challenges. Speed is important, but function is also important. So there's a lot of other things that can happen or be part of a need in an Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration in Exchange. This includes things like permissions. We've got a really good series on all the different permissions with Exchange that you should check out. In that, we cover delegates, mailbox permissions from the full mailbox level, and also folder level permissions, which includes things like calendars. There are some aspects that do not move. A good example of this are client rules. This can be a really big challenge if organizations are heavily using them. So it's important to include this in your communications. However, with proper planning, the Exchange migration is actually the most mature and well-planned aspect of a Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration. Let's go ahead and hop into OneDrive. OneDrive has completely changed how we collaborate as companies. This is both internal collaboration and outside collaboration or external collaboration. As a result, in an Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration, the biggest impact isn't actually the data move, but is this actual sharing. These don't typically migrate because in a lot of cases, you're actually sharing with the company you're moving to. This can be the largest challenge in planning and executing a OneDrive for Business migration. The other aspect to keep in mind are the data volumes can be quite large. So just as we talked in the Exchange section about not having mailbox limits, with the default limit being a terabyte in some cases, users can have a lot of data here. When we add in all the different versions that the user can have, that can be a challenge. If you're an organization that relies on versions, you also need to ensure that your solution supports this. In terms of planning and executing the aspects of the end user communications and the permissions, we have developed a great series on that, and that can be found in our blogs and in the information section. Let's move on and talk about Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams and its adoption has probably been one of the best success stories as of late, particularly in collaboration. Especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of organizations adopted it very, very quickly, and it's really transformed how we work as businesses. It's our phone, it's our file storage, it's how we collaborate internally and external. It's really become just a mainstay tool for all of us. However, in terms of tenant-to-tenant migrations, it can be a real challenge. As of recording, Microsoft has not provided a lot of APIs for us to be able to migrate this data. As a result, some organizations may actually slow their adoption if they know they have to do a tenant-to-tenant migration in the near future. However, for now, as of recording, we can migrate the team, so actually recreating the team and the channels. We can re-add the members, and we can migrate the channel chat. There are limitations into this API and how fast things can migrate, so we do have to plan this carefully and in collaboration. This is one aspect, particularly with a lot of remote workers, that needs to be carefully planned. Here at QuadraTech, we've executed a lot of these migrations, and in some of the most complicated multi-tenant projects where teams have been fully in use. Get in touch with us today if you want to learn more. SharePoint Online is a great way to collaborate and share documents with large groups of people. A lot of organizations have adopted a lot of aspects of this over the years. Some of this started with on-prem SharePoint implementations that have been moved into Office 365. In terms of a tenant-to-tenant migration, a lot of people have been through a migration when they went from the on-prem SharePoint environment up into Office 365. When we're doing a tenant-to-tenant migration, a lot of the common gotchas and issues that you had in that migration are still true today, even though we're going from one tenant to the other and not shifting versions. One of the largest issues in the tenant-to-tenant migration space for SharePoint are custom applications and really high customizations. As your data migration vendor, we can pick up and migrate the data, but sometimes the views and some of those issues can be quite challenging. You may find if you have several applications running on top of SharePoint, you actually may have a lot of little mini migration projects going on. Using our Nova management platform, we actually try to find this and identify who the owner is of this application, who can actually help us with that migration and make that plan. In a lot of cases, we may actually execute the data migration with our tool set, and then an app owner will come in and do some light reconfiguration. That being said, the most common use case of SharePoint are document libraries and basic pages. And those are really basic things that are part of a standard Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migration product like the one we have here at QuadraTech. If you have more questions about the SharePoint aspect of your migration, get in touch with the QuadraTech migration experts today. Let's talk about the reconfiguration agent for Cloud Commander for tenant-to-tenant migrations. It's important, regardless of the tool that you're using, that your product will reconfigure all aspects of the Office install. This includes resetting the Office install if you're doing click to run so the user gets a new license, but also resetting Microsoft Outlook, OneDrive for Business, and Teams so that the user can effectively be in their new tenant and up and running. When you're doing a tenant-to-tenant migration, you really want to practice this aspect as much as possible to limit those end user impacts and get your documentation up to date so that your help desk can be there ready to go. Perhaps the number one help desk call in a tenant-to-tenant migration is around mobile devices. The reality is they just don't have a great way to repoint to the new tenant. This gets even more complicated when you're moving the user's UPN or the domain in the same weekend. The Outlook client on the mobile devices just does not handle this very well. We've developed a really good guide for organizations to guide them through doing mobile device reconfiguration. We have this on our website and we provide it to our clients to help get them ready. It's important that this is distributed to your end users and really made available so that you can avoid that help desk volume. Some organizations have even put in policies to bar people calling the help desk on Monday morning and Tuesday morning for mobile devices so that they can focus more on the PCs. It's important that you plan for this aspect and understand what users are using and the devices that are being used, and practice that impact in your project so that you can avoid that help desk volume come Monday morning. When deciding if you're going to do a big bang cutover or a cutover migration, there's a couple things to look at. One is looking at your domain makeup. So if you have a lot of domains and you can move domain by domain, that may be a way to mitigate the risk or cut the project down a little bit. So you can move a couple domains a few weekends before and then actually move the rest over. One understanding is to try to figure out if you have a quiet period in your business. So maybe there is a week where between Christmas and New Year's, which not all of us want to work that weekend, but understanding a quiet period when you could possibly do larger risk items. Talking about risk, you also have to understand what is your organization's appetite for risk. So when you do a tenant-tenant migration in stages, your risk is little bits of lost productivity and some challenges in organizations collaborating in the two tenants. The payoff of doing a big bang migration is everybody moves at once, but you could potentially put the entire business into a bad configuration all at once if there's a challenge with the project. You need to balance the pros and cons and decide what is right for you. What we can share is most of our clients are moving to a big bang cutover, and we're seeing the industry move to this, doing larger and larger cutover migrations. It's not uncommon for organizations with 15,000, 25,000 users to still do a cutover or big bang migration. Our record one is as high as 100,000 users, and we can attest with proper planning, a big bang migration can work out for you. But again, it has to be the right decision for you. One big challenge is Yammer. For organizations that have a large adoption of Yammer, there are no APIs to support this kind of migration. Most organizations, when they're doing a Yammer migration, have to recreate everything on the other side. If you have certain discovery requirements, you may have to do an e-discovery search on the source, collect all that data and preserve it, but the users won't have access to it. When you're scoping your project, you want to look for Yammer usage and make a plan. Some other challenges are Flow and Power Apps, as well as Stream. When we talk about those, there still aren't migration options as well. For user-facing options, the only option are for users to actually document what they had and then recreate it on the other side. Streams is a really big disappointment because a lot of us in organizations rely heavily on this data. So to migrate that, the user has to download the video, download the metadata, and then re-upload it on the other side. And the real shame is all of the views and other information is lost. This can be a real challenge for organizations that have adopted it for a lot of their training needs. However, as of recording, there are not migration options for those products. Another challenge and got you for a tenant-tenant migration is Azure Active Directory, or just identities as a whole. We actually have an ebook that we're launching that covers this in pretty specific detail that we recommend that you download, and that'll be in the follow-up links below. The other thing to keep in mind are when you're doing your migration is you may find things like Azure App registrations that also are in your tenant that are tied to the domain, and you need to plan for that in the move. This falls into kind of the application migration planning, and really all of the Azure workloads need additional planning as well. In this video series, we've focused on the Office 365 products, but as you expand out and look at your Azure tenant, you may find a whole bunch of usage and challenges that come your way. Each one will need a specialized plan. If you find that you have adopted a lot of Azure workloads and a lot of applications that are out there, that is going to be a heavy part of your planning exercise as well. In this video, we've talked about Office 365 tenant-to-tenant migrations. These are typically a result of a merger, acquisition, or divestiture. Here at QuadraTech, we put a lot of time and effort into content support organizations going through this. A lot of the technology aspects that we've talked today are kind of the easier aspect for organizations, but the people aspects can also be a very large challenge. This not only includes end-user communication templates and guides on how to guide users through this, but also guiding your IT organization and each other through this difficult transformation into your new company. We've developed a really good series with change management expert MJ Flanagan from MJ Inspire, and that series is up on our Mad Content Hub, and it's called Method to the Madness. There's all sorts of support materials up on our Mad Content Hub, and I'd recommend you take a look if you're undertaking a merger, acquisition, or divestiture project.